Well, hello everyone. I'm here with Scott Ritter, our distinguished guest, and I'm looking forward to ask Scott a few questions about all the current issues that we're experiencing in the world. Hi, Scott, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yourself?
Thank you, very good, Scott. In the lieu of the few weeks that we had and Mr. Putin's speech and China's peace plan, what direction do you think that Russia-Ukraine slash NATO conflict is going?
I think the trajectory is towards a decisive Russian military victory that'll be achieved sometime late summer, early fall. Um, there's a lot of rhetoric being thrown around in the West, but I don't think they're able to match that rhetoric with reality. The tragic reality is what's taking place on the ground in Ukraine right now. A war which, according to General Cavoli, the commander of U.S. forces and NATO forces in Europe, was beyond the imagination of the West to comprehend. The scope and scale of the violence that's taking place is something that NATO wasn't expecting and isn't prepared to respond to. But it is something that Russia and Ukraine are currently involved in. Tragically, as I said, with hundreds of thousands of dead, and it's going to continue towards its tragic conclusion, which I believe will be a decisive Russian military victory um, by the fall of this year.
Thank you, Scott. I'm my echo.
You're okay for me. I don't know how it sounds for you, but
Um, Decisive Russian victory. What would it look like? Do you think Ukraine will have to give up territory?
well, it's not that Ukraine's going to give up territory. Russia's going to take territory. Vladimir Putin made that clear in his presentation on February 21st, that because of the weaponry that Ukraine has received from NATO, Russia will be compelled to push Ukrainian forces back from the borders of Russia, which include Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Lugansk, um, to the range of those weapons, which, because the maximum range weapon today is the HIMARS system with the small bomb guided missile, that's 150 kilometers. So Russia, has said that it will be pushing the Ukrainians back 150 kilometers from the borders of Russia. And if you look at that, that means that they're going to be taking Odessa, they're going to be taking Dnipropetrovsk, they're going to be taking Kharkov. And once Russia takes control of these, historically ethnic Russian cities, they're not, I don't believe, going to be giving them back to whatever is left of Ukraine when this conflict is over. So I think Ukraine is going to lose up to 30% more of its territory before this is all said and done.
And Scott, do you believe that um, the West will keep supplying longer range missiles? And this war, even if it ever stops, will start again? Because the West will not stop supplying weapons to Ukraine in hopes that Ukraine can retake the territory that
Well,
it
you can't
lost?
you can't supply weapons to something that doesn't exist. Um, and when we talk about a decisive Russian victory, understand that I believe, and again, I say this as an analyst, I don't have, I don't get to pick up the phone in the morning and talk to Shoigu or Gerasimov or Putin and ask them what's really going on. But I believe that Russia doesn't want this to be a situation that has the potential of continuing down the road, that they're going to invest all of this effort into defeating Ukraine only to allow Ukraine the opportunity to rise up again and have to repeat the same scenario over. I think this is a one and done conflict, which means that when it's over, um, the Ukrainian army is destroyed. That's demilitarization. And the Ukrainian government has been denazified, which means eliminated, replaced with a government that won't be openly hostile to Russia. And that government won't be receiving weapons from NATO. So even if NATO wants to supply weapons to Ukraine, there won't be a Ukraine when this is done that is ready, able, and willing to receive these weapons. So, whatever NATO is going to provide needs to be provided between now and the end of August, and we already see that they're going to have trouble supplying many of the tanks that have been promised. There's no chance of fighter aircraft being provided this time, and there has been some talk about providing Ukraine with ATACMS missiles that would double the range, 300 kilometers. Two things about that. One, if they provide ATACMS missiles, this won't change the trajectory of the war. It'll just complicate things for the Ukrainians. This will be treated as an act of war against Russia, and Russia will begin taking out the decision-making centers in Ukraine. Ask yourself why it is Zelensky's still alive today. It's because Russia has decided not to kill him. Why would Russia decide not to kill him? Because they've been keeping open the possibility of direct engagement with the Ukrainian government to bring it into this conflict. If you destroy the Ukrainian government, you destroy any trust that exists for the potential of negotiations similar to that which occurred in March and April of last year. But if Ukraine receives long-range missiles and then uses those missiles to attack targets in Russia, all bets are off, and Zelensky will die, Zelensky will die, the parliament will be destroyed, and we go back to Vladimir Putin's February 21st speech. Now Russia will be pushing Ukrainian forces back 300 kilometers, which means all of Ukraine will be taken out. So I think we're at the point where nobody's going to be giving Ukraine these long-range missiles. This is why there's reports now that Ukraine is developing its own long-range missile. They're modifying existing targeting drones, the Tupolev 141, to carry out long-range strikes in Russia based upon Ukraine's own technological capabilities. But I don't think NATO is going to be giving Ukraine ATACMS missiles anytime soon. I could be wrong, but I don't think they will.
Thank you, Scott. Who do you think to blame for the naivete of Zelensky, that he thought that the West is going to give him enough support to win the country that has over the country that has nuclear weapons and 140 million? Do you think Zelensky is just simply a fool, or was he fooled by, I don't know, Biden and company, Newland, thinking that he can win the war against the nuclear power, even with support of NATO? Who do you think to blame for this atrocity that's been basically perpetrated on the people of Ukraine, people of Russia, at the behest of one idiot, pardon my French, Zelensky, who thought that he could actually win this? Or do you think he was persuaded by the West that he can win this?
Zelensky, I've learned in the past couple of months to appreciate certain words. Inadequate was never deemed to be an insult for me. If I said somebody was inadequate, that just it wasn't meant to be an insult. It just meant you're not up to the task. But I'm learning that in Russian, inadequate means you're a fool, you're an idiot, you're not, you can't do the job. Zelensky is an inadequate president of Ukraine. He's an inadequate individual for that job. He shouldn't be president of Ukraine. He was a comedian. He was an actor. He was somebody with zero political experience, and somebody who had no concept of national security. And so you take this fool, as you rightly said, and you have the leaders of the world and their intelligence services and their military officials coming to him, promising support, promising to prop him up, telling him that he's the Winston Churchill, sending him to Congress. And so here's an actor who goes before Congress, reading a script prepared by others. And what's happened is he's become the role. He thinks he is the president of Ukraine. He thinks he is the Winston Churchill of the modern era, but he's not. He's just a fool reading a script. Can you blame Zelensky? Yes and no. I mean, it's an extraordinarily difficult position that he's been put in. One would imagine that any person with a modicum of humanity, humility, and common sense would be able to stand up and say, no, I'm not taking my country down that path. That's just not going to happen under my watch. But he's a narcissist, as most actors are. He adores the crowd. He adores the adulation that he gets. He enjoys having people come to him, playing the role of president. He likes being able to go to the White House and have the dramatic moment with Biden, go to Congress and have the dramatic moment with Nancy Pelosi, travel around the world to be feted and treated like he's some sort of superstar, when the reality is he is an inadequate individual whose inadequacy is translated into the destruction of a nation. Now, so he should be held to account, but so should everybody else who's using him, because that's what's happening here. Nobody believes in Zelensky as the president of Ukraine. Well, Zelensky may have hypnotized himself into believing that he is this great wartime leader. Nobody views him as a great wartime leader. They all know who he is. He's a puppet whom they've attached strings to, and he's now doing the dance that they're telling him to do. And this dance is being done with absolute disregard for the suffering that's occurring amongst the Ukrainian people. I mean, we're talking close to 300,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers. We're talking that amount or more wounded Ukrainian soldiers. And when we say wounds, again, this isn't, a Band-Aid. We're talking about amputations. We're talking about brain damage. We're talking about spinal injuries. We're talking about things that the average person doesn't want to consider, but it's happening on a massive scale. Who's going to take care of these people when this war is over? Who? Ukraine? There won't be a Ukraine left. Tens of millions of Ukrainian citizens have been displaced from their homes. Think of the children. When I raised my children, one of the things we were looking for is stability. We wanted to have a home in a neighborhood that was peaceful, quiet, no drama. They could go to a good school district and have a solid education over a period of time that better prepared them to become members of society. That's being denied now to an entire generation of Ukrainian children. There will be instability in their lives. Their fathers will be dead, their mothers will be destitute, and they will be condemned to live a life that is the opposite of the stability I just described. Who is to blame for this? We are, the West. The West is to blame solely. We've sacrificed Ukraine on the altar of our national hubris, the notion that we in America can dictate terms and outcomes to other people, the way that we've strong-armed Europe into supporting us, despite the fact that European support has manifested itself in severe economic consequences for the European people. The United States is to blame. This should go down as one of the greatest war crimes in modern history. It's not up there with Adolf Hitler. It's not up there with the crimes of Joseph Stalin. It's not up there with the crimes of Mao Zedong, if you want to call those crimes, but it's there. We've now entered the list. And if we continue to do this and the costs of this war continue to rise, we're going to climb up that list. And who knows, maybe at the end of the day, if this thing goes nuclear, we will be at the top of the list because of us, 8 billion people will die. But
Thank
then
you, Scott.
the
You know what? Totally bothered me since I've heard this. Remember Aristovich, Ukrainian analyst, Zelensky advisor?
Yep.
I watched the interview with him, since I'm fluent in Ukrainian and Russian and a few other languages. He said something that totally blew my mind. He said to the interviewer who asked him about the impending war, because Aristovich was basically predicting the war with Russia years ago, naming the dates, and he said, "Oh yeah, we know we're going to have to fight Russia in a big scale war in order to join NATO." And he said that to the interviewer who asked him, "Wait a minute, what if we're going to have to fight Russia? Russia is a nuclear nation. What if it drops some bombs on us?" And my shock was when Aristovich came back and said, "So what? 3.5 to 4 more million people will hate Putin." Do you realize the attitude? They don't care how many Ukrainian soldiers are, laying in their graves. And if he thinks that even the nuclear bomb, if unleashed on Ukraine, which we know Russia said it will not do that to Ukraine, but in his mind, the more people die, the more people will hate Putin. So with that attitude, these people will never want to stop. They don't mind.
Yeah.
They don't mind how many people die. Ukrainians die.
They never have. Look at Stepan Bandera, the father of modern Ukrainian nationalism. When he was put on trial in Poland for murdering somebody, and he talked about why he did it and the vision of Ukrainian nationalism that he was espousing, he basically said 1 million lives, that he's willing to sacrifice 1 million innocent lives to promote Ukrainian nationalism. That's a sickness. That's a disease. No national identity is worth that cost. None. Zero. And yet here's Arestovich, and everybody's saying, well, Bandera he was in the past. He doesn't reflect the modern nationalist the definition, and motivations. Yes, he does. The rest of it's proved it. These modern Ukrainian nationalists are just as sick as Stepan Bandera because they're willing to sacrifice millions of people to accomplish their perverted notion of what a Ukrainian nation should look like. And this is why they have to be resisted at every step of the way, not just by Russia, but here in the West as well. We went to war once against this kind of hateful ideology to defeat Nazi Germany. And I don't know why, A, we allow it to raise its ugly head today in Central Europe, and B, we're supporting them instead of supporting the Russians. I mean, logically speaking, we should be giving all our weapons to the Russians and saying, please kill as many Nazis as possible.
What happened to us, right, Scott?
Yeah, we've lost our way.
Scott, what would you say to the people who every so often I come across different, put it this way, analysts on Russia's media sides saying that, well, Russia's is being too gentle on Ukraine and it keeps moving its red lines. And there is the ammunition hunger. And there is a infamous differences between Prigozhin, chief of Wagner group, and Russia's Ministry of Defense. What would you say to people who seem to have an approach that maybe Russia is too nice, too patient, moves their red lines too often instead of being a little more assertive when acting, against the West's provocations?
Well, first of all, let's just start big picture. Russia is in the business of winning this war, not losing this war. And the best way to lose a war is to allow the enemy to dictate your courses of action. So understand that when red lines are violated, and they're violated by people who are deliberately violating the red lines, they want you to do something. They're violating your red lines in order to provoke you to do something. And generally, what they're trying to do is to provoke you to expand the nature of the conflict or divert resources away from your primary objective onto a secondary objective, otherwise diluting your war plan. And what I say to people is, thank God the Russian leadership and the general staff aren't as immature as you are. Thank God they understand the concept of strategic escalation management. Thank God they keep their eyes on the bubble. The bubble is the destruction of the Ukrainian military, the elimination of the Zelensky government, not the expansion of this conflict into a NATO versus Russia direct fight that will result in nuclear weapons release. The only chance the Ukrainians have of winning this war is to get NATO in, drag NATO in. And so they are going to continue to cross red lines. It's a guarantee. And yet, look what happened. They blew up the Crimea bridge. Russia didn't do anything. I mean, what people wanted. And today, the bridge is rebuilt. Traffic is resuming, and Russia has kept pace with its strategic objectives. It wasn't allowed to be diverted away. Imagine if Russia had overreacted and struck Ukraine and maybe even struck some targets in Poland. And now, instead of winning the battle on the ground against the Ukrainian military decisively, which is what's happening today in Bakhmut and elsewhere, Russia had to deal with NATO aircraft, NATO air defense, an expanded conflict, potential second front on the Baltic states. Wow, for what? To make you, the viewer who feels offended by Crimea Bridge, feel good? Russia's going to lose the war to appease you? No, the Russian leadership is smarter than that. So there's that. Now we get into the messy realities of war. If I go and I take a history of the American involvement in the Second World War, I could take a history of the Soviet conduct of the Second World War. Do you think it was pretty? Do you think it was perfect? You don't think there were ever arguments? Do you remember on the American side, General Patton's argument with Omar Bradley about the diversion of fuel and resources to Montgomery? You think that was pretty? Do you think Patton's confrontation with Montgomery about the invasion of Sicily and the delineation of responsibilities was pretty? You don't think Dwight D. Eisenhower was going insane every day he was alive because of this conflict, which threatened to throw the alliance apart? War ain't pretty. War is an ugly business, and it's a business that's defined by killing people. And so you have to allocate resources in the way that maximize your ability to kill people. And when you take a conflict that was being run by, fought by 200,000 men, and then you get sort of pushed back because you have inadequate resources. If you recall what happened in September when the Ukrainians counterattacked and pushed the Russians back from Kharkov, took over the right bank of Kherson, and then you mobilize, tripling the number of troops, thereby tripling the logistical sustainability complexity. People grow up. Logistics wins wars. So what was a finite amount of ammunition to support 200,000 people now became ammunition to support an army of around 700,000 men. Now Russia has increased its defense procurement. It's building more munitions, but there will be a period of time where units that were accustomed to having X as their norm of artillery fire support, because there were smaller numbers of troops, large numbers of artillery ammunition stockpiles. Now that you've tripled the number of troops, X might have to be, minus something. And you're going to have to adapt to that reality. Now, we also speak about the legalities of this thing. Wagner is a private military contractor, or was. Where in Russian law are you allowed to have a private military contractor?
You're not.
Not allowed to have it. That's why Wagner was operating on the soil of Donetsk, because Donetsk, when Wagner was formed in 2014, wasn't Russia. It was Ukraine. Imagine that. So you have this entity fighting in the Donbass for 8 years. Then the war starts, and Donetsk and Lugansk are independent nations, not Russia. But Wagner now has a frontline task. And as such, it gets a high priority in terms of resource allocation. And so Wagner gets used to a certain operational tempo that's driven by its unique status as a private military contractor. And they're able to accomplish things because they're better trained, they're better motivated, and they're better supported. But then what happened? I'm just asking people to put on their thinking cap for a second. What happened after the referendum? What happened to Lugansk and Donetsk? They became part of Russia. And now Wagner has a problem in terms of its legal status. It's no longer a private military contractor. It is now a volunteer unit that is responsive to the needs, wants, desires, and dictate of the Russian general staff. And the Russian general staff has a larger problem than supporting Wagner in mind. They have tripled the size of the military contingent dedicated to the special military operation. They've expanded the scope and scale of this conflict. They're preparing for something bigger. And Wagner's saying, we need to have the same level of ammunition support. And the military is saying, no, you don't. We happen to believe that we have to withhold some our ammunition for the big offensive that's coming. So we're going to reduce your norm, and you're going to have to live with it. And Wagner is a spoiled little brat who, Prigozhin is screaming and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is Wagner's a heck of a unit. I'm not here to denigrate them at all. The courage that they're displaying on the battlefield is unprecedented. Movies should be made about them. A movie was made about them. More movies should be made about them. More books should be written about them. Songs should be sung about them. Women should fling themselves at the Wagner soldiers, whatever you want to say. But they're part of the larger effort. And you have to keep that in mind, that while the battle for Bakhmut right now might be the show, the big show, there's other fighting taking place where other Russian soldiers' lives are on the line, and they require a modicum of support, which means you can't give Wagner everything they want, because if you do that, the other soldiers won't get anything they need, and they will die in large numbers. War is a nasty business. Prigozhin has to recognize that he's no longer the only show in town. He's one of many units competing for a finite level of resources that are being shepherded by the Russians in anticipation of a major offensive operation that is expected to unfold in the weeks ahead.
Thank you, Scott. What do you think about Zelensky declaring that he's going to take Crimea back? You know what scares me? when we hear Russia say that in Kherson, for example, Russia is here forever, and then Kherson is given back to Ukraine. I understand logistically it was not possible, whatnot, but Zelensky, for a number of month was saying that, oh, we're going to take back Kherson. Nobody believed him, but he kept saying it. I couldn't believe it when it actually happened. I said, oh my gosh, Zelensky actually was quote unquote right on this one. Then, when Zelensky kept saying that, oh, we're going to get our Azov fighters, our heroes back, when they were actually in quote unquote, I don't know, Russian prison or jail or something in Donetsk People's Republic jail, um, after they've surrendered at Azovstal plan. But Zelensky kept insisting, oh no, they didn't surrender. It was extraction. We're going to get them back. Everybody was laughing at him, including me. I'm thinking, what extraction? They surrendered. And then Russia kept saying, we will never exchange Azov. They have the ideology. They will be prosecuted. They will be tried for their crimes. And then Zelensky kept insisting, oh no, we're going to get them back. And Russia gives Azov fighters back. I'm like, now Zelensky saying that he's going to take Crimea back. Looking at the record, it's a little bit scary that every time it seems like totally impossible, like or exchanging Azov nationalists back to Zelensky. Now he's claiming Crimea. I'm thinking, what if he will? What do you think, Scott?
Well, I mean, on Kherson, let me ask you this. The Germans, when they invaded in 1941, took a lot of territory. And I know for a fact that Russia issued orders, for instance, in 1942 for a counterattack in the Kharkov region. And it failed, and the Germans counterattacked and were able to push to Stalingrad. They went into the Caucasus and Voronezh and all this. Wow.
And wasn't that Khrushchev in charge of that too?
Well, Khrushchev was involved down there, but my point is, gee, how long did the Germans hold that?
What?
They gave it back, right? And so,
well, eventually,
right? But Russia Kherson is Russian. It will be Russian again. They suffered a reverse. They made a decision that they're not going to sacrifice thousands of Russian soldiers to hold on to a piece of territory that has, limited operational viability because of logistical sustainability issues. So rather than fight and die for a piece of land that means nothing at this point in time, withdraw, consolidate your troops, and at the appropriate time, recapture the territory, destroy the Ukrainian military, push them back, which is what's happening. So, Zelensky, score a point for him on propaganda. I mean, yeah, he got a little propaganda victory, but how's it looking right now, Zell? Pretty good, right? No, it doesn't look very good for you at all. It didn't work out the way you thought it was going to work out. You're getting crushed in Bakhmut. You're getting crushed everywhere along the battle lines. Azov, it wasn't Putin that said we will never return Azov. It was Pushilin.
Oh, okay.
The head of the Donetsk People's Republic. And then he can make that statement so long as he is the head of an independent national entity. But when he becomes part of Russia and transitions into the director of a region, a governor of a region, acting governor, he's now subordinated to the will of the Russian leadership, who's looking at it saying, we have a whole bunch of Russian prisoners right now in Ukrainian custody that are getting shot, murdered, abused, and we have a duty and responsibility to get those boys home. I have to think about it. I'm getting ready to mobilize 300,000 Russian service members, and I have to look the wives and the daughters and the families in the eyes and say, I'm going to do everything for these people. They are my number one priority. Now, how do those words resonate is while the president's saying that, but if they get captured, I'm going to abandon them. I'm going to leave them there to get tortured. You think the wives are going, oh, that's okay. I fully support my husband being taken prisoner and being tortured and you not doing anything about it. No, I think families want to hear you're going to do everything you can to preserve the lives of the men who have the courage to fight, put their lives on the line for the country. And if they are taken prisoner, then you will do what is necessary to get them back, up to and including turning over members of the Azov regiment. Now, the senior leadership that was turned over, I know is controversial, but they have not been allowed to return to the fight. They're in Turkey right now in sort of an exile status. The other fighters, yeah, they went back. And if they want to return to the fight, good, because guess what happens to them? They die. But meanwhile, the Russian soldier now knows that if he goes out there and he gets captured, that the Russian government is going to do that which is necessary to get him back. And that's good for morale for the Russian troops. It's good for morale of the Russian people. I just think we have to think on a larger scale here other than revenge. Once you incorporate revenge into your thinking, you're limiting yourself. You actually become somebody who can be used, because if I know that you're revenge minded, I can do things that provoke you to respond to me. And remember what we talked about earlier. Russia doesn't want to be in the business of responding to Ukraine. Russia wants to be in the business of being proactive, compelling Ukraine to respond to them. And I just think that the Russian government's been extraordinarily mature, extraordinarily patient. Ukraine will never see Crimea again. They can look at it long distance. Maybe when this war ends, they can apply for a tourist visa, but there won't be Ukrainian soldiers setting foot on Crimea. That's an absolute certainty.
Yeah, my concern was regarding Zelensky always making these claims, and then they seem ridiculous at the time, but as months go by, all of a sudden it's there, and I'm thinking this guy is now talking about taking Crimea, and we know Russia said that's a major red line, for them. So I'm still looking for these nuclear war type signs. That this might escalate in a matter of days if somebody just makes a wrong move. Like you said, Russia is trying not to make any moves to stir this escalation, but it doesn't mean that Zelensky can't, and that's kind of worries me a lot.
Well, you also have to remember that when Zelensky made these comments about recapturing Kherson, Russia was overextended. And Zelensky knew it. He has been briefed by NATO over and over and over and over and over again that the Russians are overextended. And he knew that they had this newly reconstituted Ukrainian army that had been bulked up with tens of billions of dollars of NATO military equipment that was ready to carry out these attacks. And so there was sort of a realistic scenario for him when he could say they're overextended. Their communications and their logistic sustainability of the right bank of Kherson is limited, and so I'm going to retake Kherson. Okay, it turns out he did, not because he beat the Russians, but because the Russians went, we don't care. We're not going to play that game. We're going to withdraw. But it's a totally different situation today. Russia has built up its forces. They have built doctrinal defenses in depth. Ukraine, meanwhile, is bleeding to death in Bakhmut and elsewhere. Zelensky can say what he wants, but there's no reality attached to the words. This is like me, if let's say that when Zelensky said he could take Kherson, this would have been me in my 30s saying, I can climb Mount Everest. Well, you know what? That was believable. I was in good physical condition. There was a chance that if I trained hard, I could climb Mount Everest. But now Zelensky saying, I'm going to take Crimea is like me today saying, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. There is no chance that will happen. My lungs won't handle the altitude. My legs won't handle the stress. And so it's just wishful thinking. Zelensky cannot take Crimea. With what resources? What resources does he have to do this? What army is he going to use? What army does he have that's capable of defeating the Russian army as it's currently configured? It's just not going to happen.
What do you think, Scott? He's trying to get to Transnistria, to that largest depot, of course, the president of Moldova that borders Transnistria is doing all kinds of things to try to agitate that area. They have a new prime minister in Moldova who said we need to solve Transnistria where Russian peacekeepers are stationed once and for all. Zelensky tried to claim that Russia planned a coup in Moldova, and he said we can bring our troops into Transnistria if you need to. You think they're trying to agitate that area, Transnistria/Moldova, because Moldova is near Romania, which is NATO troops, so they could sneak NATO troops that way through Moldova and then go for Crimea? Or you think Transnistria is not a viable, I don't know, not a viable next fight that's on the table? Because it looks like it could be a next war in Transnistria with Zelensky trying to, fight Russian peacekeepers, or Moldova asking Romania to come and do some kind of fighting against Russian peacekeepers and create possibly a provocation. I think Russians suggested there could be a provocation.
No, I think the Russians have definitely brought it up, but the Russians brought it up in the context of reminding all parties involved that it views Transnistria as Russia and will treat an attack on Transnistria as if it were Russia. And so here we come back to one of my original, conversations with you today. Why is Zelensky still alive? Because Russia hasn't decided to kill him. Why is Zelensky still alive? Because Russia hasn't decided to kill them. Why? Because this is a special military operation. It's being conducted in a manner which is designed to bring Ukraine to the negotiating table. If Ukraine attacks Russia, whether it's with long-range missiles or attacking Transnistria, then all bets are off. Zelensky will die. And I think Russia has made it clear to him that you become a target and we will target you and we will kill you. Because now we are at war because you attacked us and you are a command and control target, and we will eliminate you and all your generals and everybody who's been living the soft life in Kiev. Ask yourself, how does that happen? How do you, in the midst of a year-long conflict with Russia, get to live comfortably in Kiev? Because the Russians have determined that they don't care about that they want you to live comfortably in Kiev so that you can one day wake up and be prepared to sit at a negotiating table. But if you declare war against Russia, which an attack on Transnistria would be, then you no longer have the right to exist and Russia will destroy you. They will take all the remaining infrastructure out because now they're at war with Ukraine. And if Moldova got involved, remember, Moldova is not a NATO nation. So if Moldova got involved, they would be eliminated, and it won't take much to eliminate Moldova. They don't have extensive infrastructure, and moreover, a significant percentage of the population supports the former president, who was pro-Russian, supports the former prime minister, who was pro-Russian, and it wouldn't take much for them to rise up and remove the current people from things. This isn't about Russia planning. It's the fact that the Moldovan population is added up to here with the current Moldovan leadership because of high energy prices and just stupid policy. Moldova does not want to be part of NATO. They're not angling for that. Now we talk about Romania. For Romanian troops to deploy to Moldova would require either that Romania says we're operating independent, similar to what Turkey did when they went into Syria. Turkey's a NATO member, but when the troops went into Syria, they lost NATO protection. That's why when Russia bombed Turkish soldiers, killing a dozen of them, it didn't become a NATO problem because Turkey was operating in a non-NATO capacity. If Romanian troops enter Moldova, that will be in a non-NATO capacity, and they will be slaughtered by the Russians. So I think everybody knows this. There's a lot of talk, a lot of posturing. I'll tell you why it's important for them to posture. And it's what I would do if I were the Ukrainian leadership. I would say what I need to do is withdraw 25,000 troops into the vicinity of Moldova to rest and refit, sort of like a little vacation. Guys going on a little vacation near Moldova, and then I'm going to make talk about how you might want to maneuver against them. And the Russians are saying, wow, we have to be prepared to respond to this. So now Russian aircraft that would normally be allocated to strike missions in other parts of Ukraine have to be held in reserve, prepared to respond at a moment's notice to any provocation. Russian troops might be earmarked for deployment up by Sumy, might now have to be held in reserve in the southern military district in case they have to move in. So here, what Ukraine has done is what I said, Russia what seeks to avoid. Ukraine has taken an action, and Russia now has to react. This is what I'm trying to tell you. It's always bad when you're reacting to somebody. And in this case, Ukraine doesn't need to attack because they know the consequences of that will be horrendous for them. But by threatening that attack, they have committed Russia to say Transnistria is Russia and we will defend it as if it were Russia, which means that they have to back those words up with the means. Those means are military resources that cannot be allocated elsewhere. They have to be held in reserve. So on this one, two thumbs up for Zelensky and the Ukrainian government. This is probably one of the smarter things you've done in a long time. By creating the potential of a conflict, you've forced Russia to respond by dedicating resources that can't be used elsewhere. It's very similar to what Russia and Belarus are doing, above Kiev. By creating this operational military group, they're forcing the Zelensky government to put very, much needed resources to defend that border that can't be used on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine. So Russia has created the potential of a threat. The Ukrainians have to respond to that threat, and they limit their ability to fight on the Eastern Front. The same way Ukraine threatens Transnistria, Russia has to hold forces back to respond. It's a game of strategic chess.
I like that. Strategic chess. Scott, really quickly, North Korea, should we be worried about North Korea? Because obviously they have a problem with the United States launching some type of military exercises, including the jets that are nuclear capable. What are your thoughts? Should we be worried about escalation? Because North Korea interprets these exercises as declaration of war, they've stated, and they urged UN, your favorite organization, your alma mater, to intervene and put some type of end to this, what they consider is the preparation for the attack on them. What do you think?
Well, I think the North Koreans are 100% correct. The United States and South Korea have carried out exercises that are designed, and we've acknowledged this. This isn't top secret. We've said it. They're designed to decapitate North Korean leadership, so that in a time and place of our choosing, we will launch a strike designed to take out the North Korean leadership in preparation for a short, violent war against North Korea that's designed to destroy them as a nation state. And the way we do this is that we get these aircraft, we surge B-1 bombers, F-35s, F-22s, the South Korean Air Force, and we take hundreds of aircraft and we fly them towards the North Korean border. Now, understand that as soon as they cross the North Korean border, they're only a few minutes away from Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, where the Korean leadership is. So at any given moment, they're going to fly these aircraft. Now, at the last second, they all divert away. But from the North Korean perspective, you have a wave of aircraft coming at you, ready to attack. And the North Koreans are saying, you're training to kill us. So we view this as a preparation for war. And we are putting you on notice that we may preempt your attack with our missiles that happen to be armed with nuclear weapons. So if you want to play this game, there could be very dangerous outcomes. And the outcomes aren't going to be limited to your facilities in the South Korean peninsula. Japan, you will cease to exist. And oh yes, the United States, we have long-range missiles that can reach your cities with nuclear weapons, and we're going to fire them at you too. Everybody will pay a price. And the North Koreans have backed up this rhetoric by actually testing and deploying these missiles that are capable of doing everything that they have said. This is a very, very, very dangerous situation. And it's one that requires the United States and South Korea to step away from this ridiculous preparation that they're undertaking right now. They claim it's just deterrence. But again, what happens when a mistake is made? What happens when they do it in a manner which the North Koreans decide represents a threat? Or, God forbid, what happens if Joe Biden has a bad day, wakes up and says, execute Plan Alpha, take him out today, and they do it, and instead of turning away, they go in. And then the North Koreans start launching their missiles, because you have to understand the North Koreans are preparing for that. They have a scenario in place that says, if you kill Kim Jong-un, this person here takes over, and they launch.
Yes. I agree with you, Scott. I'm always amazed with the knowledge that you possess and impart on us here. But you're absolutely right. I was just going to say that I believe this year the I don't want to venture to pronounce the guy's name. North Korean leader. He has made a law that if he's ever removed of power, like you said, automatically nuclear weapons launched on targets already preset. Are we playing now with North Korea? Are we insane? I mean, seriously.
Well, we are insane. We are insane.
That's what we are. Right, Scott. Real quick, I know our time is getting like in that Cinderella movie. The time is getting close. I want to show everyone the book that I'm in the process of reading, and this is book by the famous author Scott Ritter. Um, right here is called Endgame, and that book is amazing. It's about Iraq. Really quickly, Scott, tell us, why should people read this book?
Well, I mean, it would be read as a matter of historical curiosity. It was written in in late 1998, published in early 1999. It was a book where I was asked to solve the Iraq problem, and so what I did is I tried to describe the reality of Iraq, the reality of the inspections. I get into a little bit about the inspection activity. I talk about that. I talk about the nature of Saddam's regime, talk about the problem that we were facing. And then I come up to the question, what do we do about it? Do we go to war? And I talked about the Arnold plan that was a leftover from the first Gulf War to drive up to Baghdad. But then if we take Baghdad, then we own it. And then what do we do? And we made a decision that that's not the right thing. We don't want to occupy Baghdad. And we talk about perpetual sanctions, but the desire for continuing sanctions is collapsing. And I said that ultimately the best way forward was for the United States to accept Saddam Hussein as the reality in Iraq and let weapons inspectors finish their job, disarm Iraq, and lift sanctions and bring Iraq back into the family of nations. But when I wrote that, this was very unpopular in certain circles. So the book was quickly dropped by Simon and Schuster. That tends to happen when you write books. But I'm proud of that book. I'm proud of the effort went into it, and I'm proud of the fact that the disaster I predicted in that book, if we were to go on and occupy Baghdad, it's what turned out in 2003.
I have one of my favorite quotes here in your book on the page 209. Everybody buys a book, and on the page 209, you will find my favorite quote. If anybody wants to know what it is, I'll give you a spoiler. Scott is basically saying that, but not today. UNSCOM is dead. The shards of the inspection regime lie on the floor of the Security Council, where a new regime is being constructed that whitewashes Iraq's failures to disarm with vague language about a future monitoring system. In the US, mobilizing domestic support for a war now seems impossible. Not many Americans would be willing to lay down their lives for a discredited United Nations organization, which is what the once proud UNSCOM has become. It's just amazing. I mean, the writing, you actually calling everybody out, Scott. Did you get any backlash for writing this?
Oh yeah, no. The Department of Defense tried to stop me from publishing the book, threatening me with a lawsuit. We saw, but what I want to point to people out, because a lot of people say, "Yeah, but Scott, we went to war against Iraq." How you said there that there was no appetite. I want to remind people that that book was published in 1999, and there was this little thing called 9/11 that occurred on September 11th, 2001, that transformed the way America approached the world. So in 1999, there was no way the United States was going to go to war against Iraq. I know that because for 7 years, we were waiting for the United States to step up to the plate and and put some muscle behind the intent to disarm Iraq, and we didn't do that. But on September 11, 2001, a terrorist attack took place on the United States that empowered the Bush administration now to bring Iraq into the fold of the global war on terror. And then we went to war, and we know what happened. But I always deal with people who say, "But you said we didn't have the appetite." And I'm like, "Yeah, I wrote that in 1999. There's sort of something big that happened September 11th of 2001 that sort of changed the calculations."
Well, absolutely. I always wondered, Scott, you said that you were given an honor to speak in front of Iraq's parliament. and you actually talked with Tariq Aziz, and his fate always puzzled me. Maybe a couple of more seconds before we end our wonderful discussion and save something for the next time. What was your impression of Tariq Aziz? And what do you think? Did he get handed the fair fate of being basically given back by American, I think, special services back to New Iraq government and marked for death? And then sort of his sentence was commuted to life in prison where he died. So he went from being the only, I believe, Christian wingman of Saddam's administration, been invited to White House. He sat in with the dignitaries in the United States to dine in prison. What was your impression, and do you think he was dealt with fairly, Tariq Aziz?
You know, when I was a weapons inspector, I interfaced with Tariq Aziz on a number of occasions, and I found him to be very intelligent, very articulate, but a hardliner of the Iraqi position, as any diplomat would be at that level. When I left the inspection organization and I began to re-engage with the Iraqis, for instance, before I went to the parliament, I went to Iraq and I made a documentary film. Now imagine that I made that film in 2000, less than 2 years after I was the most hated man in the world in Iraq. Abu Azamat, the father of all crises. Every time I showed up in Iraq,
I thought that was a compliment. Father of all crises. I thought that was a compliment.
No. It meant I was a troublemaker. Every time I showed up, Saddam would convene a national security crisis council to deal with the consequences of my arrival. My face would be spread all over Iraqi TV as this is the man responsible for all of your suffering. It wasn't, sort of tense. So I went back to Iraq now to say I want to film a movie about telling the truth about weapons of mass destruction and the UN inspection efforts. And Tariq Aziz had to approve that. So I had to meet with Tariq Aziz, get his permission to come in and do this. And then I interviewed him as part of the documentary film. And I was able to sit down and talk to him. And, when you do an interview of that nature, it's not just the interview, it's the conversation you have before the interview and after the interview. And you learn a lot about the individual. I was deeply impressed with his intelligence, his humanity, and his desire to come up with a solution to this problem. He wasn't out to cause trouble. And then I flew to South Africa to get him to agree to let me go speak before the parliament. And again, the human-to-human contact there, sitting down with this guy. We went to a function that he was there, and we're talking, and he's famous for his Cohiba cigars, and I still have the cigar. He said, "Do you want to smoke a cigar now?" I said, "Well, I'll share a cigar with you." But I said, I play golf with some buddies, and I'd love to be able to take back a cigar from Tariq Aziz and smoke it on the first tee when we tee off in the tournament. And he went, "Sure, here, have a cigar, man." And we just had, it was just fun conversations, but serious conversations. And what happened to him is a travesty. He's not a war criminal. He's a man who had a difficult job, but because of him, he was a chief diplomat. He carried out his job very effectively. And they couldn't pin a crime on him. He was never convicted of a crime. They just basically held him forever until he died. And to have a man of the stature of Tariq Aziz die in prison like that is an absolute travesty. He should have been released. He should have been given the opportunity that other Iraqis had to resettle in Qatar, in Oman, and things like that, to live out his life in peace and harmony and relative comfort. But that's not what happened. We got into the revenge business, and unfortunately, he paid the price.
Thank you for elaborating on that, Scott. Because I know you had the personal experience, and as I'm reading this book, and I read a lot of different things about Iraq and war in Iraq, that always keeps surfacing his death and how he was treated. And I've heard somebody recently said that maybe Zelensky would like to pay heed to or remember that to be Americans' enemy is dangerous, but to be America's friend is deadly, is not how the sentence is going. So with that said, did you want to add a couple more things? Today is the 8th of March. I saw you greeted all the women yesterday on the Telegram channel. Do you want to say something, Scott?
Happy International Women's Day. Happy 8th of March. I hope you're getting plenty of flowers for this day. You deserve them.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Scott. Scott, you are our favorite. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your analysis. And we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you. And again, happy International Women's Day.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you. And likewise. To your family. I'm sure you have somebody who you admire and you would congratulate with that. Thank you.
My wife.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.